This isn't just a Canadian story. It's a warning. It's a blueprint. And it might be one of the most important lessons in ecological recovery anywhere in the world. Because when the coastal waters of British Columbia collapsed, when the fish vanished, the kelp forests died, and entire communities lost their lifeline, no amount of technology could fix it. But nature could. And all it took was one forgotten predator, the sea otter. It sounds simple. But the truth is anything but. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It started with silence. For decades, the waters off Canada's west coast grew quieter. Kelp forests, towering underwater ecosystems that once stretched for miles, started vanishing. These weren't just sea plants. They were nurseries for fish, crabs, sea lions, and birds. They anchored shorelines, slowed erosion, and stored carbon from the atmosphere. And then, they were gone. In their place? A purple plague of sea urchins. Tiny, spiky, harmless looking, until you realize they feed directly on kelp. Without predators to keep them in check, sea urchins spread like wildfire, stripping the seafloor bare. The vibrant green jungles turned to lifeless rock. Fish vanished. Shellfish beds collapsed. Coastal families lost their income. Indigenous communities lost cultural harvesting grounds. Even the shoreline became more vulnerable to storm erosion. It wasn't just marine life at risk. It was a way of life. And it all traced back to one absence, one hole in the food chain that had rippled outward for a century. That hole was shaped like a sea otter. For thousands of years, sea otters were a keystone predator in the North Pacific. Intelligent, social, and endlessly hungry, these mammals eat sea urchins, clams, crabs, mussels, and more. An adult otter can consume over 1,500 sea urchins a day. But starting in the 1700s, sea otters were hunted relentlessly for their fur. Their pelts, thickest of any mammal on Earth, became prized by European, American, and Russian traders. The maritime fur trade was global in scale and devastating in impact. By the early 1900s, sea otters were almost extinct in British Columbia. With them gone, the balance broke. And the ecosystem began to unravel. By the 1960s, scientists understood what had happened. But the question was, could it be reversed? Enter Operation Otter. This was no ordinary conservation project. It was a gamble. Canada's Department of Fisheries and Oceans, along with scientists and conservationists, launched a radical plan: reintroduce sea otters from surviving Alaskan populations to the decimated coasts of Vancouver Island. Between 1969 and 1972, nearly 90 sea otters were captured in Alaska and transported by boat and military aircraft. Transport tanks were custom-built to protect the otters' health and reduce stress during travel. Teams of veterinarians, biologists, and government officials coordinated every move. The logistics were daunting. Otters are sensitive to stress. Many didn't survive the journey. Others fled upon release. Only a fraction stayed near the original zones. The critics pounced. Shellfish harvesters feared otters would destroy their livelihoods. Indigenous leaders were frustrated they weren't consulted. Some scientists doubted the otters would survive at all. But slowly, something remarkable began to happen. In pockets where otters remained, sea urchin numbers dropped. Not just slightly, dramatically. And where urchins vanished, kelp returned. Kelp grows fast. Some species can shoot up half a meter a day. With the seafloor cleared of grazers, kelp began to reclaim the ocean bottom, first in patches, then in wide green waves. And with kelp came life. Juvenile salmon returned, using the kelp as cover from predators. Crabs and sea stars reappeared. Fish that had fled the urchin barrens came back. Even birds and sea lions began to repopulate these revived ecosystems. The transformation wasn't theoretical. It was visible, measurable, real. By the early 1980s, despite setbacks, a stable otter population had formed near Chequid Bay. By 2004, it exceeded 3,000 in British Columbia. By 2013, over 5,600 otters were reshaping hundreds of kilometers of coast. But the story doesn't end with ecological revival. It expands. In 2020, a research team from the University of British Columbia conducted an economic valuation of the recovery. Their findings shocked even experienced environmental economists. The return of otters and kelp forests contributed an estimated $53 million per year to the regional economy. That value came from three major sources: improved fish productivity, boosted ecotourism, enhanced carbon storage. Let's break that down. First, fisheries. Kelp provides shelter for commercially important fish like rockfish and herring. More kelp equals more fish. The ecosystem became more stable and sustainable. Second, tourism. Sea otters are charismatic. People travel to see them floating in kelp beds, cracking open clams. Local tour companies and lodges saw a bump in business as otter watching became a tourist draw. And third, climate benefits. Kelp is a powerful carbon sink. As it grows, it captures carbon dioxide from seawater. When it dies, some of that carbon sinks to the ocean floor, effectively removing it from the carbon cycle. Some estimates suggest kelp forests, globally, could sequester as much carbon as terrestrial forests if protected and expanded. Sea otters don't just revive ecosystems. They help fight climate change. But not everything was perfect. Shellfish harvesters saw declines in catch. Otters eat clams, mussels, and crabs, staples in local markets and traditional diets. Losses were real. The UBC study estimated about $7 million per year in reduced shellfish revenue. That's why, today, many communities call for co-management. Indigenous groups who once hunted and stewarded sea otters for generations now seek partnerships with the government. It's not about removing otters, it's about balancing recovery with cultural and economic needs. Because ultimately, this is about more than one species. It's about what happens when ecosystems collapse, and what it takes to bring them back. And the world is watching. Countries like Chile, Norway, and Japan, places facing kelp loss and urchin overgrazing, are studying Canada's model. Not because it's perfect, but because it proves something powerful. You don't always need high-tech solutions. Sometimes, nature already knows what to do. You just have to give it the chance. Today, the sea otter population continues to grow. The kelp forests stretch wider than they have in decades. Fish are returning. Birds are nesting. The coastline is stronger, more resilient. And the story of Operation Otter? It's become one of the most celebrated case studies in modern conservation. Not because it was easy, but because it worked. So the next time you see a sea otter, floating on its back, cracking a clam with a rock, wrapped in kelp, remember, it's not just cute. It's a keystone. A climate fighter. A silent engineer of ecosystems. And the proof that even after decades of damage, nature can bounce back, if we let it.